Hello everyone, Andrew here, and today we're going to be talking about Famicom to NES cartridge converters. Back in the day, there were all sorts of third-party ones that you could use to play Japanese Famicom games, as the NES was known over there, in your North American console. The problem being that Famicom cartridges looked like this and only had 60 pins in the bottom. Meanwhile, NES cartridges, of course looking like this, have 72 pins. So you obviously need some kind of converter to play the smaller cartridge in the bigger NES console. Unlike, of course, the Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64, where playing games from another region in that is as simple as taking out some tabs inside the cartridge slot, some plastic tabs that just stop cartridges from other regions from being inserted. But yeah, so back in the day, if you wanted to play something like this on your NES console, you'd need one of these things. And I suppose in these days you would still need it as well, but they're not nearly as obscure or sought after as they used to be, I think. Pretty much back in the day, you know, these weren't always so easy to come by, but now if you want to play Famicom games in your NES console, a quick Google search will probably get you what you're looking for. However, back in the day, as these things weren't the most common, there actually was a legend that once went around that there were NES cartridges that if you opened up, you would find a Famicom to NES converter inside. The story for this goes that one Christmas season, Nintendo was running low on NES cartridge boards, so in order to meet that Christmas rush, they actually got some Famicom boards of the games that they wanted to produce, created their own official Famicom to NES converter, stuck that inside the cartridge, and then made a generic 72 pin cartridge board for the bottom, which would then fit into NES console. So they could just mass produce that converter and the 72 pin part, and then use 60 pin Famicom boards, which I guess were in a pretty good supply, in order to meet that demand for the North American market. So what we're going to do today is talk about which NES games have those fabled converters inside, and also how you can spot them, because not every single game, say Excitebike for example, which we're going to open up today, and which is going to have a converter inside, not every copy of Excitebike is going to have a converter. There's some things that you need to look for in order to find it, and of course that applies for other games as well, like golf is another one that sometimes has a converter inside. There is a list that I will link to, but back in the day, this was like a big topic on message boards, if you can remember that medium of internet communication, where people were searching for these and they were very sought after. But today, again, because it's just so easy to get your hands on a converter if you want one, nobody really talks about it anymore. So this right here is an Excitebike cartridge which has a converter inside, and this one right here is one that does not. Now, one of the various ways that people used to say you could tell is because one's going to be a little bit heavier than the other one, obviously, because there's that converter and extra stuff inside, which is not normally inside of a normal copy of the game. So you can go by that. You could weigh them, sometimes just by hand. I mean, you can kind of feel it, but if you're looking for it, sometimes your brain will play games with you too, and you'll think you're feeling one that's heavier than it's actually not. And another way that people used to say is, well, if it doesn't have the tabs on top, because if we look at a game like golf, for example, we can see that in later on releases of NES games, they added these clips on top, which replace two of these screw slots. So I guess, you know, that saved on screw costs, and also on the ones that only have 3 slots, it uses a specific Nintendo security bit, so you can't just open it with your ordinary screwdriver. But what we want to look for when we're looking for Famicom converters is that original 5 screw slot, which 5 screw slots, not security bits. So these can just be opened with your ordinary flathead screwdriver, and those can be immediately identified because they do not have those clips at the top, which replace those top 2 screws. So when you're looking for converters, you want to make sure that you have one of those original NES cartridge varieties. But even so, as you see right here, we have 2 Excitebikes, both have that original top, both have 5 screws on the back, but only one of them has a converter. So again, you can kind of try and weigh them, but the way I found that's pretty much fail-proof is you have to look inside the pin slots down here. And unfortunately, they're probably not going to show up too well on camera, but I'll try and put some diagrams and some pictures and such, which will make things make a little bit more sense. If you look at the pins, And the pins are symmetrical, so there's going to usually be on an NES cartridge a little notch on each of the pins. If that notch is in the center of the pin, thus making it symmetrical, that means that your NES cartridge does not have a Famicom converter inside. Now, make sure though, be very careful that you are only checking games which have no clips on the top and are of the 5-screw variety, because you can look at a game like, let's take Star Tropics for example, a later, well not later NES release, but a release after the cartridge design had been changed, and if you look in here, you will see that the pins are not symmetrical, so you might get excited and think, oh yeah, this Star Tropics cartridge has a converter inside, but a converter will never ever be inside a game that has those clips and only has 3 holes on the back. So don't get excited if you see that. It has to be a game using the original cartridge design. And again, if you look inside one that's not symmetrical, so one of the notches is off to one of the sides, it's not in the center, that is a very good indication that your cartridge has a converter inside. So again, just make sure, you might get excited, you might see that old cartridge design, you might hold it and think that in your mind it feels a little bit heavier or something like that, but definitely check those pins. And if you have the ones that are off center and are not symmetrical, that means you're in pretty good shape for opening it up and finding a cartridge converter inside. And another great thing is that because these are the original cartridge design, you don't even need to order a special Nintendo security bit to get them open. What I like to do, and one thing I would definitely recommend any collector do, is you can get these Nintendo security bits here. There is a larger one for opening up consoles like the Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64, and there is a smaller variety used for opening up the later cartridge type of NES cartridges to get inside there, and it also opens up Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, Game Boy. So it's great to have for a lot of things, but without even having to order an extra thing like that, since it uses the original cartridge design, which all used flat screws, with the single line slot, you can just use a flathead screwdriver and get all those open. So we're gonna see if I'm correct, and by finding those off-centered pins, and also by it being a cartridge which does not have those hooks on top and has 5 screws, will there be a Famicom to NES converter inside? Let's have a look. Alright, so this should hopefully come off if I got all the screws out. No, there's always one that you don't do enough. Hopefully that will be good. And there you go. So that is what the inside of the cartridge with the converter looks like. As you can see, here is the Famicom 60-pin board right here. So this is the entire Excitebike game. This is a piece that plugs into, and then all this is a 60-pin to 72-pin converter on the bottom. Now compare this to the other Excitebike cartridge that we were looking at earlier, which I have taken the back off of, and this is what your typical NES game board looks like. So you actually have proper chips and such on there, 72 pins, no kind of massive converter in there, and it really only takes up like not even half, it's more like a quarter of the inside of the cartridge. So you can really see why people think if you hold one with a converter in it, you should be able to feel a little bit more weight. So that's a cool thing to look at right there, I think. But what we still need to do actually is take out 2 more screws before we can get a real good look at the converter. So let's do that now. Alright, so we can now remove this from the cartridge itself and have a very nice look at all the different pieces here. So we have this part at the top, which is our Famicom game, and you can take this out just like this. It was probably never meant to be removed, so it's in there pretty tight. But there you go. This is all you need to play Excitebike. This little thing right here, we could go pop this into our Famicom right now, and it would actually work. And then as I said earlier, this is pretty much your converter right here. So you can now grab a Famicom game, and you can plug it into this and play it, right? Well, not exactly, because there are these two tabs here that were keeping it held into the cartridge. But what you can actually do, and this is like some magic right here, I swear, it's awesome, is you can remove this part too, that has the 60 to 72 pins part. Flip it around like this, plug it into here, and make sure we do this nicely. Just like that. So now we flip that around, and now you can take your Famicom cartridge. You want the label on the front of your cartridge to be on the side that is opposite of this chip. So we can now insert it like this, and because the tabs are now on the bottom of the converter, it all has enough room to fit absolutely perfectly. And you can now put this into your NES and it will actually work. Like, isn't that awesome? Like, I don't know, it just blows my mind that you can rearrange it like that and it works. I think that is so cool. One thing, unfortunately, though, is that if you put this into your front-loading NES, and actually I should mention, by the way, that the front of the cartridge is the side that has the chip on it. So if you were to insert this into your NES, it would be as if this was the front. And by the way, because this cartridge is pretty cool, people will probably be wondering about it. I know I thought it was really neat the first time I ever saw it. This is Salamander, or the Japanese version of Life Force on the NES. But yes, if you are putting this into your console, consider this the front, the side with that chip. But yes, the problem being, though, obviously, if you insert this into your front-loading NES, it's kind of, problematic, because this could easily get stuck inside the console or such. As you saw on the third-party Famicom to NES converters we looked at earlier, there is that kind of ribbon on the converter that allows you to pull it out easier, and so it won't get stuck in there. So you might want to make yourself a custom case for this, so a custom casing that holds these pieces together. Then you can put your Famicom cartridges in there and easily insert them into your NES. I use the AV Famicom, so it's kind of silly for me to use a converter at all, but as you'll be able to see in my footage, it all kind of works nicely in that way. And if you have a top loader, you probably won't have to worry too much about things getting stuck in there. But yeah, this is just so cool. And back in the day, when it wasn't the easiest thing in the world to get your hands on those Famicom to NES converters, it made sense, I guess, to want to find one in your in an NES cartridge that you already owned, and then it could be a little bit of a DIY project to make yourself a nice case and such for it. Plus, I mean, it's official, so you never had to worry about compatibility problems or potential for the lockout chip on the NES to not like your converter, because it's an official one, so it should work officially on an NES. So yeah, this is just a really neat thing that, again, you really don't hear people talking about anymore. 10-15 years ago, it was all over the place. People would always talk about searching their NES games for them, but these days it's kind of like a lost legend. So if you have NES games, definitely go check it out. You might already own one and you don't even know it. And I hope you enjoyed this video, learned something new, and please be sure to post down in the comments what your thoughts about all of this are, and if you happen to find one in your retro collecting adventures. So thanks again, and hope to see you next time.